Marsh Pod. Recording this early morning, June 30th. Got a good pod ahead, man. We got a good pod ahead. We're talking about timely winning streaks and deep dive on Lonestar. So let's start there. One of the most dangerous things in the world, and this is going to be very self-serving, but is me with a cup of coffee and time on my hands, which is exactly what I had this morning to take a look at Lonestar and figure out, man, what in the world is wrong with Lonestar? Filled up the cup. I'm an iced coffee man, but I drink my iced coffee out of a coffee cup because that's just the only way to do it. Put some ice in that bad boy, and we dug in. And boy, is it interesting. So Lonestar has lost 7 of their last 9 games, inarguably one of the worst stretches in SimWorld. I have, on many occasions, talked about, we don't talk about South America and them being, catching a stray, them being 4-16 in their last 20 since starting 5-0. But we're going to talk about Lonestar because they're a top team. But this stretch, 7 of their last 8 games, 1-7, is granted not as bad as South America, but it's trending in that direction. So their last 8 games, real quick, give you a recap. All of this started May 30th, so it's been in the last month, which Pointless Power Rankings, we're actually going to delay. That's going to be next week, next Wednesday, the 5th. They picked a bad week or a bad month to display that after going number 1 at the end of last week's Pointless Power Rankings. Kiss of death, conspiracy theorists, rejoice, because my goodness, that has come in clutch this time. But anyhow, last 8 games, lost to Gotham 5 by 7, 78-71. Lost to Philadelphia by 38, 90-52. The juggernaut of 9-15 Philadelphia. Lost to Rocky Mountain by 27, 68-41. Lost by Indy by 17, 74-57. They beat Lakeshore Drive 65-41. We thought, hey, they're stabilizing. Not so much. They lost to H-Town by 7, 75-68. Lost to Bad Boys by 7, 69-62. And then another embarrasser. Lost to the North, one of 7-17 record by 18 points, 75-57. So 4 games in which they lost by 17 or more points. 3 of them to teams under 500. Indy Stripes 10 wins, Philadelphia 9 wins, the North 7 wins. Then 3 7-point losses and a 24-point win. So their last 8 games, what have they done? Let's take a quick peek. Most points they've scored, 71. They did it once. Fewest points scored, 61. They've only scored more than 70 points once all season, or in this stretch. Times over 60, times they've scored 60 or more points, 4 times. Times below 60, they scored 4 points. Their average points scored in these last 8 games, 59.1, which would be the best defense in SimWorld Hoops. So over the last 8 games, the team that Lonestar has played against has been, on average, the best defensive team in the league. I'm not saying they played those teams and those individually were the best teams. It's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is their opponent has morphed into the best defensive team in the league. Now, there's some teams that make sense for them, right? Gotham 5. Gotham 5 is a top defense, arguably the best defense, fewest points allowed all season. But of those teams that they've lost to, the only other top 10 defensive team in that stretch has been, as we're doing a quick look, H-Town. They have played no other top 10 teams defensively, yet collectively that group has combined to be, on average, the best defensive team in the league. Great start. Let's go to the other side of the ball, offense, or their defense. Most points they've given up all season, 90. Fewest points they've given up, 41. Times that they've allowed 60 or more points in the last 8 games, 7 times. Their average points against in these last 8 games, 70.3, which would be a top 11 SimWorld Hoops offense. So again, Their opponents have collectively become a top 11 offense when they've gone up against Lone Star's defense. Now, who have they played that's been of note offensively? No one. Indy Stripes is a top 10 team, top 10 offense, and that's it. That is the only team. Excuse me, and Bad Boys Basketball. They have played, beg your pardon, 3. Indy Stripes, Bad Boys Basketball, and Gotham 5 are the 3 teams they have played that are a top 10 offense in the league. Otherwise, the North, not. H-Town, not. H-Town actually is a top 10 defense, so that they played 2. Lakeshore Drive, not. Rocky Mountain is. Philadelphia, not. Gotham 5 is. So, I beg your pardon, 4 times they have played a team that's a top 10 offense, but collectively these last 8 games, which means basically the other 4 times the opposing team has risen to the occasion to be, on average, a top offense. All right, so maybe they haven't played anybody, right? We're talking not great defenses, some good but not elite offenses. They must have been just playing like a really difficult schedule. No, not really. Over the last 8 games, the average record of their opponents currently, as of June 30th, 11.8 wins, 11.7 losses. So collectively, they have played 500 record against them. And again, that 500 record has resulted in the number 1 defense in SimWorld Hoops and a top 11 offense in SimWorld Hoops. But they've played 3 teams. Of those 8, 3 teams are currently in the top 8. Gotham 5, Rocky Mountain, and H-Town, and they have lost by 7, 7, and 27. So they have played a 500 record, yet beaten no teams above 500. Obviously, their 1 win was to Lakeshore Drive. No other team outside of those 3 is currently in the playoffs, and only 1 team, Bad Boys, is at 500. So 4 teams under 500, and keep in mind that for that average record, 11.8 and 11.7, 2 of those teams are 9 games above 500, and 1 team in the North is 10 games below. So that average record is a little misleading because it's essentially all under 500 teams. It's just that 2 teams are so far above 500, it brings your average up. What does that tell us? It tells us that they're not playing really great teams. They're playing mediocre to bad teams, non-playoff teams, and they can't beat them. Not a great sign when you get to the playoffs and you, spoiler alert, play all playoff teams. Lone Star hasn't even managed to beat the bad teams. So what's causing it? What's causing it? Well, prior to May 30th, we thought Lone Star was buoyed by an elite backcourt. Well, it just so happens when you're buoyed by an elite backcourt, when that elite backcourt starts to struggle, you start to struggle too. So let's start with Ninny Gibson because he's the one that's notable. In the last 8 games, since May 30th, he has had 6 games in which he's shot below 50% from the floor. Prior to May 30th, they played 17 games. That occurrence happened 8 times. So 6 of his last 8, he's shot under 500 after going 9 of his last 17 shooting above 500. 2 of those games actually came right before May 30th. So if you want to stretch that back and do the last 10 games, 8 of Ninny Gibson's last 10 games, he's shot below 500. In the first 15 games, that happened 6 times. It's not a great sign. Average scoring for Ninny Gibson in these last 8 games, 10.4 points. He's had 3 games in which he scored under 10, including 2 4-point outings. In his first 17 games, he scored under 10 points once, and it was 9. So Gibson has really struggled, is the moral of those statistical story. He has been a less than ideal second fiddle. And truthfully, this is a lot of what we saw last season when it was Dallas, right? Now Lone Star, obviously. But when Ninny Gibson was the heart of that Dallas team, he didn't really continue to shine throughout the season. He had very high ups, very high low, or very low lows. And that's why early in the season, Lone Star kind of comes out of nowhere because you get this injection of Jace Maguez, great basketball player. But Ninny Gibson really rose up. His play had really improved. We saw that, as that evidence suggests, offensively over the first 17 games. He was the second best offensive player on this team. And he was a guy that they could rely on. If Jace Miguez did have a tough game, Ninny Gibson would rise to the occasion. That hasn't happened over the last month. He has been a net negative in many cases. He's been looking more like a third or fourth best player and not so much a great player. His scoring average is down by almost 4 points per game in the last month compared to the rest of the season. So let's look at the other star player, Jace Miguez. I have spoken often that I thought he was potentially the best guard in the league. I don't think he is, but he's in that conversation. I think he's technically listed as a wing, right, based off the latest great little segments that we've had of top 5 players at each positional group. But Jace Miguez has actually been just about fine. He's averaging over the last 8 games 17.6 points per game, 17.8 on the season, so he's still keeping his scoring averages up. Now, he hasn't been awesome. 5 games of the last 8, he's shot below 500. That happened just 8 times in the first 17 games. So not only has Ninny Gibson dropped off the face of the earth offensively, but Jace Miguez has fallen off kind of as well. Those two pieces need to be efficient. And when you look at, they have each had a combined 11 occurrences of the last 16 possibilities, right? That's not 16 games, just 8 games each. They have had 11 times in which they have scored or shot under 50%. So their offense, which revolves around these two guys, has just been abysmal because of it. Now, they're not it, right? Stars are going to be your stars. You're supposed to play good, but let's take a look at their supporting cast. Mork Thomas has long been a concern of mine at starting point guard position. Rejoice because on June 25th or 21st, he stopped being in the starting lineup. But here's a fun fact for you. He has not had a single made field goal since May 18th. Mork Thomas, who was a starter up until June 21st, has not made a field goal since May 18th. Folks, it's June 30th. It's a month and a half away. And Mork Thomas still hasn't hit a jumper. This is Ben Simmons level offensive ineptitude. He has been absolutely garbage. And the fact that it took him this long to be removed from the starting lineup, I don't like calling teenagers garbage, but Mork, my man, offense is not for you, we can tell. But he's been removed of his starting duties. In his place has been JaMychal Pitt. He's been inserting into the starting lineup as of June 21st. He's made field goals, fortunately, but he hasn't quite lit the world up. He is 11 of 35 shooting since June 21st. That's good for a 31.4% shooting percentage. Now, real quick though, those 11 made field goals, again, 11 of 35, not elite, is 3 fewer than Mork Thomas has made all season. Mork Thomas on the season dates back to opening night, March 3rd. Mork Thomas has made 14 field goals. 3 of those came on opening night against Gulf Coast Lockdown. Since June 21st, JaMychal Pitt has made almost as many. That's how great this option is. Now, I think technically when we talk about backcourt, Jace Miguez and Ninny Gibson are guard and wing, but it's mostly because Mork Thomas has been the other guard, and it's basically a 0 there. So their roster construction, less than ideal in terms of starting lineup. So then who is their third, fourth best player? Well, I would put that on Tyrell Marr and Derek Long. Tyrell Marr is technically their third leading scorer. Well, not technically, he is. He's their third leading scorer, but he's been brutal. In the last 8 games, 6 of them he's shot under 50%, something that happened in the first 17 games just 5 times. So not only have we had a net 0 from Mork Thomas until most recently, but a net, super negative, I should say, from Mork Thomas, and then a mediocre JaMychal Pitt. We've also had really bad games from Jace Miguez, or sub-elite games from Jace Miguez, pretty bad games from Ninny Gibson, and also offensively poor games from their third best player, Tyrell Marsh. So not only have their star players dropped down, but their supporting cast has not been playing to the level of which they were earlier in the season. Derek Long's been Derek Long. Rebounds a lot, scores occasionally, good defensive anchor. The one thing I will say about Derek Long, little fun fact, in the loss to Indy, he played all 32 minutes. Now, I'm not going to look through every single game and figure out if that's the only time that somebody's played all 32 minutes. But fun fact, we've been talking about, can you play players 32 minutes a game? Guess what? Derek Long has proven you can do it. So fun fact, like I said, nothing really to that one. Just as we were doing our coffee cup research, was very interested in that little piece. So, in conclusion of the negatives, and I've got a counterpoint coming, don't worry. In conclusion of the negatives, star players for Lone Star have been offensively terrible. Their supporting staff has not been up to the par that they were earlier in the year. Opposing offenses are now top 10, essentially, whenever they play Lone Star, and opposing defenses morph into the best defense in SimWorld hoops. And that's the bad part about Lone Star. Now, what's the counterpoint you're saying? There's got to be something good of this. I got one thing. I got one thing for you, and it's not great. The counterpoint is they're playing an oversaturated schedule in the month of June. So in March, they played 5 games. This is all we're just looking at schedule. In March, they played 5 games. Low volume early on. Morph to April, they played 8 games, and they had 2 back-to-backs, of which they won a collective 3-1 in those 4 games. Move to May. They had 5 games in the month of May and just 1 back-to-back. That was 0-2, but it started this latest 8-game skid. In June, they played 6 games. One of that was a back-to-back, and one of it was 3 straight games. They played 5 of their 6 games in 5 nights. Now, it wasn't, again, 2 and then immediately into 3. It was the 21st, the 22nd, and then 27, 28, 29. They have played a very, very condensed schedule in the month of June. Now, I'm not going to use that as an excuse because they had a lot of time off between May 31st when they played to June 14th. Then, after that one game on June 14th, they had a week off until June 21st. So, they've had plenty of time off in between it, but they have played a very saturated schedule in terms of 2 big stretches, a back-to-back and 3 straight games. Is that going to solve everything? No, it's not, because you would think in that first game of a back-to-back after a week off, or the first game of that triple header after a week off, you'd come out with a little bit of energy, and they just haven't. They continue to lay an egg offensively throughout this month. That's a concerning sign, because as we said earlier, when they get to the playoffs, shocker I know, but they are only going to play playoff teams, of which they've been unable to even beat out of playoff teams over the last month. It's not a great sign for a team that we thought and we had as the number 1 team in pointless power rankings. Again, those come out next week. Spoiler alert, Lone Star will not be number 1, but the tide needs to shift soon. Otherwise, the ship is sinking in Dallas. Now, real quick, before we get out, we've been going a little bit longer than normal. Appreciate you tuning in as always. Real quick, the last thing we'll say, timely winning streaks. Beyond the Arch and Atlantis. Beyond the Arch has now won 4 or 5 straight games. They won yesterday. That's currently the 3rd longest active winning streak, in case you weren't aware of that, after Southeast lost to Reigning Trace, who we'll get to in 1 second. Atlantis, meanwhile, has won 4 straight games. That's the 4th longest winning streak. I know, 1 game. 3rd, 4th. That's shocking, I know. Meanwhile, Reigning Trace has won 3 of 4, which is worth keeping an eye on. And why? What are these timely winning streaks and good records have been doing for us? Well, now, Beyond the Arch is 1.5 games up on the 9th seed, which is huge, and tied in the win column with Run DMV, who has 2 more games to play than Beyond the Arch. Now, Run DMV does have the head-to-head, but Beyond the Arch has moved up ahead of that 9th seed fracas and moved themselves into position to potentially get into the 5th seed. They sit at 6th right now. Atlantis has jumped above that fray, right? They're not out of it, but they're above that fray with a half-game lead over Bad Boys Basketball, who is 500, who they also play head-to-head July 13th. So why do these matter? Because they are, as I said, above the fray. They're not out of it. They need to keep winning, but they are in the battle for the final playoff spot, as opposed to some of the other teams that have struggled recently that are now below it, like Indy Stripes. They've lost 2 in a row in 4 of 5. Philadelphia, they've lost 3 straight. Europe is 2-3 in their last 5. Lakeshore Drive, 2-3 in their last 5. They've put themselves in contention to survive this last stretch of the season. It's not out of the woods. I think Bad Boys Basketball still has a very great chance of getting in there. But Beyond the Arch and Atlantis have positioned themselves, as has Reigning Trace, who's now a half game behind Beyond the Arch and tied in the win column with both Beyond the Arch and Run DMV. Those are all now above that 500 line. That's important as the season comes in. On Monday, we're going to take a look at what to watch for in the week ahead. But these teams with very importantly timed winning streaks have put themselves in position to be a little bit larger margin of error. That doesn't exist anymore for those teams that are below them. I don't want to say any of those teams are out because mathematically they aren't. There is still a very realistic outcome in which Cascadia gets rolling, who I think it's probably down to them. I'd probably put that as the line to the 10 seed. But Europe, Lakeshore Drive, Indy Stripes, crazier things can happen. They're 2 games, 2.5 games out of the playoff spot with 7 to 8 games left to play. They could get in, but I don't expect it to happen, and that's because Beyond the Arch, Reigning Trays, and Atlantis have positioned themselves to be above that. Their margin of error is thin, but it's thicker than it was. And that's what this has done for them late in the season. Have a great weekend. SimWorld Hoops returns on Tuesday. That is, of course, July 4th. We are going to have a pod up on Monday that will preview some of those games in terms of what to watch for in those. Now's the time when we can actually do that. We can actually figure out what we're watching for. But hope you have a great weekend. Hope you have a phenomenal July 4th. We'll talk to you before then, but have a phenomenal July 4th. And talk to you on Monday.